Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear.
But other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
ARROW is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Disclosure Team with me, your host, Vinny Adams. Before we get into this video, I just wanted to point out that you may have noticed that I'm still playing the 2-minute plus introduction. I have actually got a new introduction currently being made. It's finished and I'm getting it sent over this weekend. So fingers crossed this is the last video that you will see with the long introduction, because I get so many mixed messages about the introduction. I get so many people who absolutely love it. They say it's the best intro on YouTube, and for that I'm super grateful. But then I understand that other people, they don't want to sit through a 2+ minute introduction. So we're working on a updated, slimmed down version, taking out some clips and adding maybe something else. But I appreciate everyone's patience. The main reason why I had such a long intro is when it was made last year in 2023, all of my interviews were done live. And like most people who do live videos, they like to have a countdown so that they can just get their final preparations done while the countdown's happening. But instead of a countdown, I thought a 2-minute plus video would be a good opportunity to know that the show has started for people watching, but also for me to prepare behind the scenes for when the intro's over. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me, guys, and I appreciate that it's taken a while to get the new intro, but the guy that does it for me is a professional. He's an old friend of mine, so he's doing it as a favor, so I appreciate that he's doing it at all. Let's get into this interview. So the following is an interview with Courtney Marchesani. Courtney is a UFO researcher who has had her own sighting, but in this interview, we specifically look at the claims made by the recent whistleblower, Jason Sands. Now, Jason came out on this Epic X space, which threw a lot of people off. They thought, it's a strange way for a whistleblower to come forward. But, I've kept my eye on things that have occurred since he came out, and I've not really commented on it or anything like that. So I know that Courtney was involved with Jason before he came out. So I thought, let me get on somebody who knows a lot more about the story and can kind of lay it out and explain it in a bit more context. So as always, guys, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. I really appreciate all the support, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Courtney Marchesani. So Courtney, thank you so much for joining me today. How's things?
Things are going well. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Courtney, I really wanted to kind of bring you on to really pull together all the information we can on the Jason Sands, the current or latest alleged whistleblower. But before we get into that, I just wondered if you could give me a bit of a background on yourself and what kind of got you into the UFO subject.
It was a sighting, a very close sighting my daughter and I had in 2015 in Oregon. I was taking her to college, and lights came down over our truck and hovered at very close range and then split into two and paced us, and a bunch of strange things happened. And then afterwards, a bunch of other things got kicked off for both of us. So that's what got me into the field of UFOs specifically.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. And is that kind of, did you just dive headfirst into research after that?
Not really. I waited for a little while because I was dealing with the transition afterwards, is the only thing I can describe. It took a good period of time. It took me probably 2 years to then start researching all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's quite a life-changing moment when something like that occurs. So yeah, fully understand that. Well, you're very much, appreciated in the community. I see you all over the place doing great work, and we've got a lot of mutual friends. And so, I've got a lot of respect for you. And that's why I wanted to bring you on and really try and lay this Jason Sands story out in all of the nuances and the little pieces to try and put it together in one sort of full video. So I guess the first question would be, when did you first hear the name Jason Sands?
It was sent to me in a text, and it was asked to be kept anonymous and confidential. So I've always kept confidential who sent me the names, but other people had the names. And so I went to confirm these two names. It wasn't just Jason Sands. There was another individual. And I went to a fellow researcher and I asked her about it, if she knew anything about it. And she said she had received one of the names. So she had checked with multiple people and they had all received the names. And so, a lot of people had his name, but I guess I was the only person that pursued finding him. So what happened was my mutual friend shared a story with me that somebody had shared with her in the intelligence community from the UAP Task Force Forum. There is a classified forum. It's essentially like a database within the intelligence community where they can share information confidential. And there's two different sides of it. There's the high side, which is classified, and then there's the other part of it. So this individual had seen the story about Jason Sands out in the desert and him having this contact experience with an NHI. So that got shared with me. And then I kind of rushed ahead and shared that on SOR, and then realized that I shouldn't have, even though the story was, validated by somebody who had the UAP Task Force Forum access. The story was not out there yet. So that was kind of a misstep on my part. So that's why at that juncture, Dave at Space Radio, he had gotten a call from somebody in the NSA. And they said, please take the story, down essentially. And I asked Dave to take the story down as well, because we didn't want to have something out there that would jeopardize a whistleblower. And they also asked us not to share his name. So what ended up happening was he and I got in touch because I essentially apologized to him for sharing his story without it being out there. And that's how we became friends.
That's fantastic. And so in that time, was Jason talking about coming forward in any official capacity, or what was the initial plan?
Yes, he had already given testimony to the ICIG. So he explained that process to me. He had, traveled to DC and given information. And we were talking about what his personal plan was, because he had essentially a media plan very similar to David Grush, I would say, where he had worked with journalists already and made commitments to give them first rights to his story. So that part, yes, we discussed. It was an ongoing discussion.
Wonderful, thank you. And I guess at this time as well that he'd been fully vetted, and he had proven he was who he said he was. Is that correct?
I went to I live in Alaska, but I have to travel to the East Coast a lot. I have this last year because my mom had a stroke. So I've been going to the East Coast in Maryland and Pennsylvania specifically. And so I knew that he was in that general area. So he said, let's have a meet and you can, see my credentials. So I did go and I met with him, and he showed me a series of IDs from his organization, 3 different forms, all from the same organization. And I also spoke with a couple of other people about him. So I saw his credentials, but I also did some fact checking with other individuals that he was who he said he was.
Or are you aware of any direct evidence that he has provided to, whether it be Arrow or Congress or any of the committees? Was there evidence provided, or is it just sort of verbal testimony?
There was evidence provided to Arrow. He gave his testimony, but as I understand it, there were also witnesses to one of his facts that he testified to. He was doing intelligence and he was doing surveillance out, in the Area 51 area. I'm not exactly sure which exact location it was. He could tell you that. But he overheard phone calls when he was doing surveillance, and he wrote reports about this, about hearing about NHI. And, this was essentially like establishing leaks or problems. He talked about this on the space as well. He went into some detail about what he was doing for the intelligence community. So he wrote a report essentially that documented all that. And there were 2 witnesses to that, as I understand it. And that also went up the chain of command. So in terms of evidence, I think there was a report written at the time, and I also believe that there are witnesses. Now, whether the witnesses came and validated this for Arrow, I do not know if they were, able to give their witness accounts to that report. But I know a report was written, and that would be evidence.
So what is the story about what he knows? What does he think our relationship is with NHI and these legacy reverse engineering programs? What did he learn during his time in his positions?
Well, I've been very careful about describing, his opinion because, that would be his opinion. But in our conversations, we've discussed all the legacy programs that he was in contact with, his role in it. So he had his career where he had his job, but then he also had personal experience as well. And so I think that's the other thing that's getting confusing to people in the community, that he actually had hands-on first-person experience in the programs, which a lot of people are disputing that now and saying that those facts aren't even true. So there's that part that's in dispute. But there's a second part of it, which he had his own personal experiences during his time in the program. So I stay away from those 2 different things because they're really his experiences. And, in our conversations, he's educated me a lot about Area 51, the underground stuff. And so he has a lot of different viewpoints on all of that I've been really surprised by. It's been very eye-opening. And I just listen deeply to what he says and his interpretation of things, but I try not to judge anything.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's kind of the way that I've looked at this as well, is to take in the little pieces of information that I've gone back and looked at in the past few weeks and what Jason has said. And just to keep an open mind and, not write him off like quite a few people have done, and just see how this plays out. So are you aware of how this story progresses? Is there going to be more official avenues taken with him?
I doubt that more of his story will come out. I think that what he has testified to so far will probably be the end of it. I did understand that there was going to be a hearing in October that he was called to testify to, and has already met with some of the congressional leadership to talk about it. They have asked him specifically about where these programs are and, oddly enough, how they can legally go about getting them. And he's been like, I can kick the door down, but I don't know how to tell you actually legally how to get to this stuff. That would be somebody else's job, but I can point to it. But as other people have said, things have probably moved. When he was there, it was in the 90s. So I don't imagine it's going to go much further than what has already been entered into the record, unless there's another hearing that comes about and he'll be called. So that would be it.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there may be things happening behind the scenes that we, the public, won't be privy to? He'll be speaking further with lawmakers, for example, throughout the year.
I don't know, because the community seems to believe that because he didn't follow the official media presentation, that will somehow derail other congressional appearances. I don't necessarily think that that's true, because the information is the same either way. It also makes me really skeptical if that would be the case. So I do think there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we are not privy to as researchers, or as even people who are just, enthusiasts wanting to see what's happening. So I could say it's definitely a possibility, because we're not kept in the loop about a lot of things already.
You mentioned previously that he was lined up with sort of media to break his story, but then, he came out on this X space and we didn't really see any mainstream coverage about Jason. Do you think that was because of the way that he came out on that space, that everything else was just like pushed aside?
Yes, I do. And I think that he felt in some ways his hand was forced. And the reason why one other person, an analyst, had already come out and shared his story in a podcast probably 2 months earlier and didn't get some of the facts right. So he was disappointed in that. Of course, what happened on SOR, that we had to kind of backtrack and, repair the damage from that, So I think he felt pressured, in a sense, to speak for himself instead of having other people speak for him and potentially getting things wrong. So I thought that it was courageous for him to want to do that. Meanwhile, he didn't seek permission or ask anyone else's support in doing that. He just boldly did it and claimed it himself. So one part of that I felt was incredibly spontaneous, and in the space was very raw and authentic, that you cannot take that away from that historical, unprecedented moment. On the other hand, the moderators of that space did not give him any time. So he went on for this inexhaustible amount of time, having no downtime, no breaks, all night long. And so I feel like that part of it, he may have felt like, not that he made mistakes, but that he was trying to be as careful as he could with everything and give people as much time, but it was obviously exhausting. And I think that part of it, as long as it went on, probably made other journalists and other people kind of step back and think, okay, well, he's shared all of this. What more could be shared? Maybe that's one thing. The second thing could be that he made commitments with other individuals. So he had to go and backtrack with them and talk to them about his commitments that he made with them. And third, I think that, and I'm just going to say this in a very plain manner, I think a lot of the journalists in this space are very competitive. There's a lot of surf turfing that goes on over sources and the scoop. And so I think that may have also been part of why people stepped back, is because they didn't get the story and they were maybe committed to it. But I don't know. Those are just my interpretations or my opinions. I don't exactly know.
No, I really do appreciate that. I know it's, I'm sort of asking questions about Jason, and I'm trying not to have you speak on his behalf. It's very difficult. So I do appreciate what you're saying. And I think as well, it seemed to be that in that epic space that he was a part of, that, there was a mixture of things that he'd discovered in his official capacities, mixed in with experiences of his own, mixed in with opinions of his own. And I think, from what I can gather, that a lot of people in the community kind of threw that all into one thing and said, look, there's red flags here because certain things don't make sense. And do you think that was kind of how it was perceived?
Yes. I mean, I tried to say, I didn't think he was in the space. I had two people say, hey, I think this is your guy. And I was like, there's no way. Because I had done a space the day before with someone else who, it was in the intelligence community, but he wasn't a whistleblower. And so they're like, I think this interview has prompted other people to come out. And I had been exhausted because I'd been working, burning the candle at both ends. And by the time I got this call that my guy was on, it was like 10 at night. And I was like, there's no way. because all our communications up to that point had been, we're going to hold the line, we're going to wait, and there he was. And so I was astonished, as everybody was. So when I jumped in on the space, I tried to clarify that. I tried to say that. And I also tried to say that in the space before, when his experience came up by the other witness. I said, he has different types of experiences. There's the program that he was in, which George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell have come out and said they validated and verified. And then there's his personal experiences, and there's historical contact experience in the desert. And so they are different things, but I think that they have been conflated, and I think that's all people needed to reject him out of hand.
Would you be able to kind of give us a brief outline of his experience in the desert, just so we can kind of get a picture of what he went through?
Well, when I first heard the story that was, on the UAP Task Force forum, it was very truncated. There was a convoy that had left in Nellis out on the range, and they were told by their commander not to talk with anybody out in the desert. And they were in the convoy, and there was a person walking on the road with U.S. military fatigues on. So they stopped. Jason was in the passenger seat of the vehicle, and he rolled his window down to speak with the person and ask if they needed help. And it was not human. It was not a human being. It was another type of being. And it asked him for a part for his ship, that he was needing an element for his ship. That was the story. And the other part of the story was that Jason said, why don't you go over to Area 51 and get it over there? And that the being had said, no, because those people in those old programs were murderers. Now, that's the story that I heard that went up onto the UAP task force. But one of the things that Jason had done is try to clarify different elements of the story, because that's what he was upset about, that the story was being shared and it wasn't, in fact, accurate. So one of the things that he clarified in the space, from what I understand, because I wasn't there on the space when he was there from the beginning, when he told his history and the story and how this all led up to coming out on Spaces, was that one of the people had said that they thought that the being thought he was part of a maintenance team, and that wasn't true. That part was an error. And so when Jason had this encounter with the being, he essentially put this all up on the high side of the UAP Task Force forum, so it was classified. So that's part of the problem with the story coming out. If he hadn't have put it up on the classified part and it was on the lower part, he could share all this openly. But because it was classified, there were parts of it that he had to, be careful about. So that's the story as I heard it. And then when he came on Spaces, he validated almost all of it. When I had first called him to apologize after the Spaced Out Radio blunder, he had told Dave Scott, the only thing that I'll validate is the convoy. So all the rest of it at that time, he wouldn't validate it. So, but now, that was in January, it's been, 3 months since, he validated every part of it, including the fact that the being was wearing military fatigues. That was accurate.
And you mentioned in there, and you mentioned a few times, the UAP Task Force Forum. How is that different from the actual UAP Task Force as we know it? Because I think I think people think that he initially claimed to be a member of the UAP Task Force, but he wasn't. It was more about the forum. So can you clear that up for us, if you don't mind?
He was never part of the UAP Task Force, and that was part of it that I think that was maybe confusing, and people ran with it, saying that he was alleging that he worked on the UAP Task Force. And so he came out and cleared that up on the record pretty quick, but people don't seem to accept that for some reason. What he was saying was he submitted his case, essentially, his story, to the UAP Task Force Forum. And the reason why that's different is because the forum was used for multiple silo intelligence communities all over. They were looking for everything. I think that they were looking for any information on breakaway civilizations, obviously back engineering, or an ancient civilization like Atlantis or Lemuria or something like that. So that's how the UAP task force was actually doing a three-prong approach, going out into the IC communities to ask for information to come back. So they use the UAP task force as one part of that for people to share information, uploading videos, uploading documents, and to be able to communicate interdepartmentally between different agencies. So that's the distinction. But there was, I'm not going to say his name, but there was an investigator assigned to Jason's case who investigated it for the UAP task force. So that's another level.
Now, one thing or a few things that have been said since is we've had some fairly respectable or high-level individuals say some not so great things about Jason. We've had Richard Doty, with some negative things to say. We've had Dr. Eric Davis as well, which I found quite surprising. What was the response from not only Jason, but what were your feelings when you saw these individuals saying what they were saying?
Oh, of course, it's disappointing. I mean, especially Dr. Eric Davis, whose Open Minds interview was a cornerstone for me in my own research that he did with Alejandro Rojas, and the way he went into great detail and, spoke about his experiences, including interpreting Gary Nolan's study, with the caudate putamen and the immune system and how he broke that all down. So I deeply respect him and his work. I do think that it is disappointing in the regard that there are different special access programs that not everybody is privy to or has knowledge of. And so I think that that was a discrepancy maybe between those two specific individuals. Now, I can't speak for Dr. Eric Davis, but I do know that they looked for Jason on the TSI clearance database to try to find him. And so he tried to explain to them why they wouldn't be able to find him, and that in his program, it was an SAP program and they wouldn't know about it if they weren't read in, which I found was very hypocritical. Because when you talk with all these guys in this community, that's what they always say, that, the bigoted list, the wave access, the SAPs. I mean, half of their job is to educate us, the public, about how these things work in classifications, so we don't waste our own time. And so that part of it I thought was very interesting, that there was an expectation that, well, we should know what program you were in or what clearance levels you have. But I think that just shows the compartmentalization. It doesn't make me not believe Jason. It makes me think these things are buried so deep that the right hand doesn't talk to the other. And so I'm not in any way going to say that I have an opinion about Dr. Eric Davis, because I think he's very legitimate and has been in the field for a long time. I do think that I was surprised by the lack of acceptance that there might be another program that he was unaware of.
Yeah, I think that, again, that's something that would make sense. I have a lot of respect for Eric Davis. So I was quite surprised to see him make such a brash statement. But let's be real, he is not one to hold back on his opinions sometimes on social media. So, no, I appreciate that. Now, it's also been said that, since David Grush came out and said that, he'd found 40 plus other whistleblowers who were involved with the legacy programs, etc., that Jason isn't considered one of those 40 plus whistleblowers. Is that correct, do you think?
I think that's another thing that is very confusing, because he is in a whistleblower group with 40 other whistleblowers that support one another. They went to his when he testified, and they went to support him. And I can't say the names of who all was there, but the people that you would expect to be there to support another whistleblower were there. So that's one of the confusing parts, because here's one of the things that I also think people aren't picking up on the research is we've seen stuff come out from Chris Mellon recently about crash retrieval programs, right? About the Kingman case in Arizona and who's been involved with it and access and who got access or who didn't. And it all stopped short, right? It all stopped short. Well, I think that it's interesting that crash retrieval is the big thing that everybody wants to talk about, but maybe there's a subtle difference between what Jason's talking about. Maybe he's talking about a different type of legacy program. Maybe it's not necessarily a crash retrieval program. If you listen to what he's talking about Eisenhower. He's talking about the agreements that were made that were part of our lore. And so, UFO lore. So maybe it's a different type of program. But when it comes down to the whistleblowers and whether he is considered a whistleblower, there's a lot of legalese that's also not well understood, like the NDAA. He went under the NDAA process, which was set up and set aside for whistleblowers. So yes, he would be included in that necessarily. But there is this other part of it, like Danny Sheehan's got 40 whistleblowers, and is he part of that? Well, I think that there is so much confusion about the 40 whistleblowers that it's really just hard to tease apart, and they're not going to tell you who they are. And for good reason, after we've seen what's happened to Jason Sands. I mean, he has been through the grist mill. And you think in a community that would give someone the benefit of doubt and at least listen, we didn't even get that. We got a lot of judgment and really horrible, horrible vitriol. So I could see why we don't know who the 40 whistleblowers are. And I think it's good that some of that confusion remains, honestly.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. It is unfortunate that there's a vast amount of people within this community of ours, shall we call it, that they don't seem to want to take a step back and let things play out, or they almost feel like they're owed something from these individuals, and it's very difficult to sit and watch happen in real time. That's why I personally I make no statements or anything about this subject or Jason until I let a few weeks pass and speak to a few individuals, and here we are having this conversation now, and then maybe I'll have a little bit more clarity on the subject. So it is disappointing to see so much, like you say, vitriol aimed at these people. But are you aware of any of these 40 plus whistleblowers? Do you know that they exist?
Yes, I know who some of them are. But after what's happened with Jason, I'm sure that they perceive me as somebody who maybe was, involved with him having to come out before he was ready or before the time. So I'm just staying in my zone right now and in my lane, which is research. I felt like all those missteps and mistakes that happened is what led to a lot of this. And so I've learned valuable learning lessons, and I've talked about them openly. But the one thing I have always been steadfast with is protections of whistleblowers. Like, for example, not many people know this, but after David Grush came out with his interview last year, there was I would say an orchestrated campaign against him that came out from journalists and suspected or alleged intelligence community people to use smear tactics to talk about his mental health diagnosis, to talk about a former potential arrest on record, and even a hospitalization for mental health. So some of that is medical information, which should be protected, right? Because the U.S. has the HIPAA laws. So we knew, because I worked with UAP Medical Coalition at the time as a board member, we knew that this was going to come out. And we basically established a press release to ask The Intercept not to do this, not to leak a veteran's medical record online as a tactic. So they did it anyway. So we actually followed up on that and went to Tim Burchett's office and said that I said I knew where the leak was. And so they took that information, and I asked them to investigate it. And I asked them to take it to the ICIG and please institute the Whistleblower Protection Law. And they did. And so I went down to DC and met with Tim Burchett's staffer, and he was like, I can let you read the letter that we wrote, but you can't have a copy of it. So I was like, okay. So I was in there reading all of it, and they did. They said where the potential leak was. They said this should be investigated. And so I just had said to them at the time, will we find out, where the investigation leads? And they said, no, but we've done the best that we can. So I do stand up for whistleblowers and those kind of real world action steps that you can take as a grassroots. So I hope in that regard, I have developed a little bit of faith from the whistleblowers, that I certainly didn't intend any harm or to harm Jason. Some of it was just, I would just chalk it up as, at the time, I thought everybody knew the story. That was one of the things that was a misperception. Like, I thought everybody knew this story, but nobody knew it. And that was the thing, like SOR leapfrog over all that journalism, all that vetting, all of what had already been done. And that was alarming because it was like, how'd they get the story? Where did it come out? Is it accurate? So we kind of backed up, which I feel good about because we worked with him directly to make it right.
Yeah, no, I kind of I mirror your thoughts there on the importance of whistleblower protection, just like you would with source protection in this subject as well. It's valuable, and I know that it can cause, again, people within the community to get frustrated when we talk about sources and we can't reveal sources, but it's all part of the process. And when you're embedded in it, unfortunately, that's, you either play the game or you don't have any trust from, nobody's going to want to speak to you. So, I fully understand that.
There's others. I mean, there's other very important people. One of the people that I have been focusing on recently is one of the other people. He's not like a formal whistleblower, not that I know of, but he was written about in Leslie Kean's article to the Debrief, and his pseudonym was Jonathan Gray. Now, he's somebody who works in NASIC and has validated David Grush's claims. And so, I think there's individuals like that who are still inside helping journalists to get information out the best that they can. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous to try to find out who they are or put them in jeopardy. So that's one of the reasons why I'm talking so cautiously about all of it, because there's obviously people that are still in. And I suspect he might even be in back engineering programs or know other people who are, and he might also be Ross Coulthart's source. So, they're definitely in there. And I think the people in the community just want it now. But we're not thinking about the danger to these individuals or their harm to themselves or their families. So it is a really serious thing. I mean, I've gotten threats just because of this whole Jason Sands things and people coming after me. So it is real. It is very real.
We talk about the NDAA and these whistleblower protections, but I think before the Schumer amendment got scrapped at the end of last year, that I think they were looking to put in stronger protections for whistleblowers. I think that's needed personally. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the things I'm working on right now. I've been going through that. I've been going through the NDAA language before it got watered down, and looking again at the different types of whistleblower protections. And I just got in touch with a lady in DC who has an actual standalone whistleblower group. So I'm going to take that to her. I'm going to take the Schumer amendment and have her look at it and see if she thinks that we can work at it at another lobbying angle. Because I know that there is lobbying for it and the Schumer 2.0, but they're being very guarded. The people that are pushing that through in DC, they're just not looking for help. They're not looking to share information. And so I see that as, okay, you want to protect your work. I get that. But because this is a amendment going into the NDAA, to some degree, as a taxpayer and a citizen of the, American citizenry, I think to some degree they should be more transparent about that, especially if there's going to be legalese around things like eminent domain, whistleblower protections, how those things are handled. We should have a voice, and other groups, especially people who are educated on this and have firsthand experience, like the whistleblowers, they should be involved in crafting that language themselves for other whistleblowers because they have firsthand experience with it.
We'll see. I mean, it being an election year, it seems that a lot of people are quite nervous that this may get put on the back burner while this all plays out into 2025 and things like that. But hopefully we can keep the train moving, as they say. I think it hasn't helped with the way that we had the Arrow office set up to deal with the UAP subject, and it just seemed that it caused more issues than it did good. Especially we had people like David Grush not wanting to speak with Arrow. I mean, what are your thoughts on how that all played out?
Well, I think that it is very conspicuous that John Greenwald knew where to get the FOIA designation specifically to get signal messages. For one, that's like, okay, that's an ingenious level of FOIA. Now, he is a genius, don't get me wrong, but I think someone might have tipped their hat, to how he could get it in order to document that. So I think that, Sean Kilpatrick obviously wanted those things to come out, which is fine. I mean, we want to have transparency. I think transparency is good. But, Grush, on the other side, has been saying the whole time that he was reticent to meet. He said at first in the hearing that he did not meet with them, and was not asked. But then the conflict is that he was asked, and even had a meeting set up with Senator Gillibrand, and didn't show up. So it's hard to look at that and say, well, obviously this is mixed messages, and some part of this may not be factual. But I also go and defer to the fact that it was a Department of Justice investigation, and he actually put in a complaint about threats to himself and to his wife. He said that they gave a message that they could get to us at any time. So here you have somebody who's a veteran. He has, issues around mental health stuff associated with his combat experience in Afghanistan. He's dealt with tons of administrative terrorism, including seeing individuals or hearing about them getting hurt on the job or disappearing on their job. So I think about all those different things before I judge David Grush about not appearing in, and I wonder to myself, well, why would he not? Maybe he was afraid. That could be one reason. He already had put in an ICIG complaint, and they had warranted it. It was justified as an investigation. So I'm not going to leap to conclusions there either, because he's obviously afraid. Some part of him is afraid. I mean, we need to look at that. We need to look at what he's saying. In the Joe Rogan interview, he was talking about people in the intelligence community suffering, working on these projects because of everything they're seeing. Now, people don't necessarily have the training in this, but some of this is secondary trauma. I'm just going to say that. He's been exposed to individuals who have been harmed, some people possibly who have been killed while doing this work, and he's investigating it. So I'm just going to put that out there and say, maybe before we judge him for not meeting with people, maybe he had good reasons why.
I think that's a very important point. We try and, I'll say we, I mean, people, humans, members of the community, they try and put together a full picture with only half of the pieces of the puzzle. Some people are quick to say, well, he must have done this because of this, whereas we don't know. And I think you make some very important points there. And I think I would just reiterate that to as many people as possible, whether you believe David Grush or Jason Sands, or you definitely don't, we don't have ultimately all of the information. And I would say to everyone, withhold all those final judgments on these individuals, because we don't know what they're going through or what they've been through fully. And I think I think everybody wants truth and transparency, no matter what it is, well, then let's not scare these people off from coming forward any further by being so abusive a lot of the time. It's we all want the same thing at the end of the day.
Yes, we do. And I think one of the things that we need to do ourselves in this community is make that change. Nobody can come in, no Lou Elizondo, no Dr. Eric Davis, no Diana Pasolka can come in from the outside into our internal community and say, hey, this has to change, or ufology must die, right? Like, this is the big thing, like the UFO field needs to die. Well, I see that as a different kind of challenge. I think that if in any community where there are social problems and issues, the change has to come from within that community in order for it to evolve. And so I think we can. I think we are strong enough as a community to make these changes within our community, but we are the ones that have to do it. We are. Not people coming from the outside saying this community is worthless. I don't believe it is worthless. I mean, I think that one of the big things that I was just so astonished by, that Jason Sands chose to speak to the UFO community directly, and that's never happened before. And so I was really proud in the fact that we are still people to talk to and to acknowledge and to deem worthy of our research efforts and the things that we do, because I've always stood by this. We're some of the best. We're some of the best researchers out there. You know, we know our stuff. And so I think the change will come. It's going to come from within. And I think we're strong enough to do it so that the ufology will last for a lot longer.
Yeah, I'm on board with that completely. I think, you know, by just continuing to do great work, not getting involved in the drama, focusing on the research, and being appreciative of people that have gone before us, but being welcoming to people that are new as well. I think, you know, I try and stick by those kind of thoughts, and hopefully together we do start making some positive moves and making this subject a bit more accessible and friendly. Well, listen, Courtney, thank you so much for being here and laying this out for me. Before you go, is there anything you're currently working on or anything we should look out for in the future?
I think there's, you know, I do the news for SOR occasionally, so I will drop a little bit of information for your group, just because I have been working on some stuff. I've heard that New Paradigm Institute is going to be having a big event tomorrow. I haven't followed up on it yet. I was going to make some calls, but there might be some big announcements being made about film and book projects. I won't say whose, but I will drop that in there, that could be coming sooner rather than later. And I also heard that there was going to be a hearing possibly this summer from Senator Gillibrand. So when you asked if there are going to be any other actionable things, I think that might actually happen. So that's something we can look forward to it as well. Wow,
that'd be really good. That'll sort of get things moving again in the right direction, and hopefully it's a public hearing as well. We'll see. But again, thank you so much, Courtney. I really respect your work and everything that you do, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinny. I've heard really good things about you too. That's why I agreed to do this, because people are like, "Oh, he's good. He's really good." I knew that you would be a good one.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And to everyone watching, as always, thank you so much for being here and for the support. Please always go and follow my guests. I will pop their links in the description of each video. And until the next one, take care and goodbye.